Hello and welcome to PolitFlix episode, I think it's 6 or 7. I mean, I only found it, and I really should know which number it is, but the idea being, you should know by now, bit of politics, bit of film together, and trying to find the common points of connection. This week I'm joined by an actress friend of mine, but she's a lot more than an actress and somebody who understands immediately that all, I think, art has a political dimension by its very nature. So without further ado, Jennifer, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm calling from Houston, Texas. Yes, where the storm just hit us. I'm an American. I'm from California, and I've been an actor for probably about 30 years now. I'm a little bit of a polymath. I do a lot of different things, but acting is my first and foremost passion.
Terrific. Now, we start off then with that idea of, I suppose, you've been confronted with, in terms of current affairs, Mother Nature at its most frightening in the last fortnight. And, I mean, is it something that you could even, do you think you'll ever channel that in a performance? I mean, is that something that even any movie, bearing in mind that we like to, I mean, for some bizarre reason, I think we're almost wired to watch disaster films and so on. Does the inner actress come out during the storm, and does the storm maybe influence future performances?
No, I'll tell you what, and I went through this with 9/11 as well, which, was a different kind of disaster.
Recent anniversary there as well, isn't it? About a week ago, wasn't it? Yeah.
We're up now to, 16 years.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, when it comes to dealing with disaster, when you're in it, you're in it. You almost disassociate. There's no, I'm acting, I'm doing X, Y, Z. This was a really great example. Harvey really taught me a lot about humanity and how amazing my community was. But when something has to get done, you don't think about it. You get it done. The shock and the trauma and the sadness come later. But when you're dealing with saving lives, and I have actually many friends whose lives were saved, and I have friends who were in the middle of just, as we say here, get her done. Just go out and get people, especially when they're the elderly or the infirm. And you don't really think about it. You just do it, right? It's automatic. You just do it.
Yeah, but it's not something that you can prepare for in your head, really, is it?
No, you can't prepare for it. You can't prepare for any kind of trauma. It's, a Navy SEAL prepares very differently than, say, a civilian on the street.
Yeah.
But what was really beautiful was to see how many people were heroes. In fact, it's really moving. There were kids who were 13, 14 years old who were grabbing air mattresses and putting it out in the water and just going to families and helping them get off a roof. They were 13, so nobody teaches that. You just act on impulse.
Yeah.
And it was very beautiful.
And yet, as I say, it's something that one would imagine people don't want to then see on screen, and yet we kind of do gravitate to, I suppose, these kind of, big, epic disasters. I mean, you mentioned 9/11. One of the things that's come up a lot in conversations we've had on the podcast is the extent to which there was a phase in Hollywood for about a year after 9/11 where some movies that were already in pre-production, production just before 9/11 hit, and some that were put on hold as a direct result of it. But ultimately what happened was that there's still a demand for a particular type of genre. And what happened, instead of abandoning action or adventure or whatever, was that things simply became less frivolous in tone. So, for example, there was still Bond, but Bond evolved into the kind of Daniel Craig era that was less frivolous than the Brosnan era. The Bourne movies kind of at their peak, and there was a tone, and even sort of things like the comic book films had a kind of a reflection of it. And I noticed this evening I went to see something called Kingsman, the sequel, and the first trailer was actually for a movie that really belongs about 20 years ago. It's even from Roland Emmerich, who did things like Independence Day and so on. And it's just like you just see like cities being wiped out by what seems to be a natural disaster. I think it's called Geo-Storm or something. And I just thought, I don't think I'd want to be watching that if I'd just come out of, the hurricane or whatever. But then on the other hand, maybe that's exactly what I do want to watch. Because propaganda, they talk about the war for hearts and minds, which happens in warfare. Well, I wonder, is it the same in any challenge in life? If we're confronted with a new challenge, can art and fiction actually, in a way, help prepare people for it? Even in war,
Yeah, I was going to say, go back to your film history and look at what movies were coming out during and especially right after World War II. We had musicals because musicals made people feel better. That's the reason there was such a glut of them at that time, was because people needed to be from the war. They didn't want to be inundated with it. You will have trauma in your life if you're continually exposed over and over and over again to something. So everybody wanted a feel-good movie, and the musicals served that purpose. So did the comedies. And that kind of happened with 9/11 as well. There was a period where lighter movies came out, although it kind of escapes me, but somewhere around that period there were a lot of very intelligent movies that came out that were very funny, like Little Miss Sunshine or some of the things that were very entertaining, but you wanted to laugh more than you wanted to do anything else.
Yeah. You're, I suppose, by nature, you're certainly not a cynic, but you're, I think, alert to any kind of agenda filmmaking. And I think what's interesting at the moment is that there's no really pro-Trump media out there at all. For all of the problems that man may represent, even the Spicer stunt at the Emmys was kind of a bit, to use my favorite word, kind of meta-textual. There wasn't, I'm not seeing any propaganda for both sides. It's people who despair about about the state of politics or whatever. If anything, if one does treat the current regime as one that they don't like, as I'm presuming many people in the arts seem to, then they should be very happy that the arts accordingly. Even Kingsman tonight, as I mentioned. Okay, they don't explicitly say Trump, but it's not too much of a leap to see a kind of an anti-Trump agenda there, and so if he's such a big villain, one of the things I wonder is that although he definitely used right-wing rhetoric to get to power, no question about that, and is open about that. And after the tragedy in Charlottesville, I think that's very possibly why he did not condemn the right wing, because he thought, oh shit, I don't want to lose my my fan base, so to speak, so I'll condemn, as he put it, both sides. But what I don't get is a sense that he has a completely ironclad propaganda machine that I think he is the one who's actually outnumbered now in terms of certainly media and arts against him. Even the hurricane was something that was politicized, not so much by him, but very much by kind of a generic opposition, be it online or in news media. Now, he brought that on himself, granted, but it is interesting, I think, anyway, sort of sociologically, if nothing else. So I take it you're not a fan. You're not a fan of his, right?
No, I splinter myself and call myself an independent. I am not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat, because I think there are sides. There are problems with both sides. And right now, obviously, there's a huge problem with the right. It's very hard to explain this, but I think what Trump's psychology is very interesting, and he's quite brilliant at it. He's very good at reading people, and his rhetoric was to rile up the people who were just not happy the last 8 years. And all he has to do is push a few buttons and let the people do it themselves. So he can kind of step back and say, oh, no, it's not me, it's fake news, it's such and such. But I think he is a button pusher. But the other side of that is the news media is extremely they are really good at taking an incident and blowing it up 100 times. And the wrong people doing that will cause, a race war. There's a big thing going on right now in the States. There's a store called Hobby Lobby. It's a very Christian, right-wing Baptist store. And they're selling these, actually they're very pretty. They're like cotton balls on the cotton ball sticks and decoration. Somebody came in there and got very angry and put it all over social media and said, well, my family were slaves, and this represents slavery. And, even the people who are very right-wing are saying, okay, see, that's the problem. That's the snowflake thing that's happening. You're way too sensitive. My family's Jewish, and I lost a good line of my family to the Holocaust. Okay, I lost an entire line to my family being made into lampshades and gaps. Okay, I don't turn around every time I hear somebody with a German accent, look at them and accuse them of being racist or anti-Semitic or Nazis, because that's just absurd, and that's where we've gotten to. And we have a media outlet that likes to kind of push that button as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Trump, rightfully so, starts saying fake news. He's just not very eloquent. He can't speak. That's the problem. But he has a point in that while we've got a news outlet that really enjoys riling people up and creating these race wars and creating these political wars and the divisiveness, and that has to stop.
Yeah, easier said than done, I suspect. But is this all with the change in the media since social media, or if you can cast your mind back to when you were, I suppose, beginning to take an interest in arts and in politics? The Clinton era is just as nasty if you look back on it, because he was, I suppose, venerated to an almost Obama level, but also vilified to a level that I think even Trump doesn't face. The idea that he was kind of on trial from day one, partly because he didn't represent an interest group that was on the rise, which is that very right-wing kind of evangelical moneyed lobby, but also that he was against the odds, splendidly successful for a third-way politics, which sadly appears to have died a death in the world. But do you have fond memories of Clinton?
I was probably in my 30s when Clinton was around. I paid less attention to politics, and I will say that I think most of the people in my age category didn't really care about politics up until the last few years. And then you have, the younger generation starting to care, which is interesting. But we didn't have social media. We didn't have what we have today.
Yeah.
And anybody who was born after, I don't know, the late 90s or mid 90s will never have grown up without the internet, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem. They have a completely different viewpoint than those of us who are like, oh, remember back in the day, well, when we had to write letters, that was, I started to laugh about things like that because I realized, oh, I'm in that generation. I didn't get on the internet, as we know it today until I was maybe 28. We didn't have it. It wasn't there. So we couldn't get that news. That news was only in the paper or it was on television. And if you didn't read a lot of the paper or you just read some of it, you watched some television, because you had a life and you didn't have a phone in those days to watch things, on television or news outlets, then you just only paid attention to what you paid attention to. We're so overexposed now. It's the media is out there 24/7 in some fashion, and it's exhausting. It really is. Where I'm like, oh, I'm getting off Facebook. I'm so sick of it because I don't want somebody's opinion. I put something out there and then somebody writes this, nasty opinion. I'm sorry, I didn't ask for your opinion.
Yeah.
You have a right to your opinion. I don't need it. So, and I know you've been through that. So, but that's the problem with social media. When people want answers, when I'm in the medical field, when people go, oh, I think I have this, they go to Dr. Google. I'm sorry, Google is not the way to find out whether you're in a health crisis or not, but people do it. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, they would have gone to something else, I suppose, in the era before that. So, okay, Google is now overused and people use social media and so on, but a hypochondriac of any sort who had means maybe would have run to the library or went to the bookshelf and looked up the symptoms checker, that sort of thing. You know?
Which is a different way, but they also just would have been able to use a different part of their brain. You know, everything is so fast now because we do want instant. We want, in every category, including the arts, we want instant gratification, right? We watch these movies with CGI. We want to be stimulated. We want to, everything has to be louder, faster, funnier. It's got to be big, 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 big. And you'll see more people with ADD. There's more people who are having a harder time patiently sitting through a film that has vocabulary, that people are speaking in. God forbid it's a classic. I mean, how many kids do you know? Maybe it's different in England than it is here, but I don't know too many kids of 12 or 13 who've seen a lot of Shakespeare that can't handle the language. It's archaic to them.
Yeah.
We're losing the switch.
Well, I think that they're forgetting that Shakespeare, of course, is modern English. It's just delivered differently. I mean, they couldn't face him like Chaucer, which is, of course, Middle English. But yeah, if you listen to Shakespeare done well, as it should be, performed very well, or if you have the luxury of sitting down and just reading it, you start to see, well, funnily enough, there are certain tropes and rhythms that he uses. He's not a plotsmith. His plots aren't particularly original, contrary to popular belief, but he manages to structure and dramatize things in a way that even today, some filmmakers still draw on. And indeed, even though you're absolutely right about, I think, the depletion in certainly quantity of filmed, or to some extent maybe even staged Shakespeare, people still use Shakespearean as a byword for any kind of anything from Netflix to an actual big budget Hollywood blockbuster that even has a semblance of good dialogue or a kind of a family tragedy or political subtext. The fact that that's not what necessarily Shakespeare was all in inverted commas about is neither here nor there. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a dearth, I think, of adult thrillers. Now, when I say adult thrillers, I've said this before, I don't mean that kind of adult thriller, although there's nothing wrong with those. Shannon Tweed and Sharon Stone and all those, Tane McClure, I could list them all. But anyway, yeah, I've moved on. Not I don't watch that sort of thing anymore. But the idea is they have I'm talking about the stuff they made, particularly kind of in the 90s, where the films were exciting and thrilling, and they had a lot of action in them, and they were appealing to some of the same tropes and beats that still define, cinema today, particularly franchise filmmaking. But they had a literacy to them, and they had a texture and a maturity, and yeah, an adult quality. And by that, it doesn't mean that you'd bathe in darkness either. They tended to be quite upbeat, at least towards the end. There was a survival dimension, there was a triumph over the system, whatever it is. So something like The Firm, the Tom Cruise one, I saw again recently. It's on Amazon and it's on Netflix. It's impossible to avoid. Its closest, people were talking about a film starring Emma Watson and Tom Hanks that came out on Netflix recently called The Circle, which is all about social media and yawn, yawn, yawn. I'm not going to watch it on principle, partly because The Firm did that a lot better years ago. Obviously, things get updated and so on, but a lot of the stuff that Harrison Ford was in as well in the 90s. I mean, people talk about his current renaissance where he's sort of doing lots of belated sequels, and that's great, and great to see him still going, but he had this real glory era in the early 90s. It was Patriot Games, The Fugitive and Clear and Present Danger, and then Air Force One, I think, with a brief blip for something called Sabrina. But those movies managed to be entertaining, action-packed, escapist. I mean, they are genuinely escapist. You are escaping into a world that's not yours. They have a vicarious glamour to them in the sense that there's certainly a bit of lifestyle porn. If you look at your average Harrison Ford or Tom Cruise movie from the 90s, even the kitchen layouts and so on are it's like a Stepford family, if you like. It's very idealized. But there are stakes, there are tense moments, and as I say, the conversations feel at once organic and genuine, but at the same time giving away some of the motifs without lecturing the audience. Whereas today, we have all these big budget, even comic book blockbusters that feel a need to be, in inverted commas, dark, as in you just bathe in a dark mood for its own sake, without any clear purpose. And at the same time, a tendency to really lecture the audience, as if to say, look, we're not just a comic book movie, we're saying something important about politics, or whatever it is. I mean, on the one hand, it's good that people are at least pretending, as in being pretentious enough to say that there's a political agenda you can have in a comic book movie or whatever. But at the same time, he's wearing a Southern cape. This is not genuinely a geopolitical, convincing, mature product, which gives a genuine adult a break for 2 hours, you know. But
I will be really honest. I don't watch sort of the Marvel CGI films because I get so overstimulated with all the special effects. It's that tentpole thing. It's like it's got to be more and more and more. And I've gotten to the point where other than Wonder Woman, because I did enjoy that, but I decided to just take a step back and I look for movies that have good plots, good characterization, good storytelling, and of course, you know, brilliant acting. Many of the great plays like Fences are being produced on film, and that's to me a little bit more interesting. Although I do see this trend in film where we're now going back and making remakes and we're doing things because the imagination is dying. It's another dying thing. I think it's part of what's happening with our culture in terms of that, you know, faster, funnier, we got to have instant. And so I don't think there's a discipline anymore. The great writers are not writing for the big screen. I think they're writing for the small screen. I think they're writing for like an HBO series, or you know, I think that's where some of the writing is getting interesting.
But even that can kind of peter off. I mean, one of the things I've noticed about House of Cards, for example, did you see any of that?
I've seen the first 2 seasons, and then my Netflix died, so I have to go back and find a way.
Well, it's good that it died after the first 2 seasons, because that's pretty much, for me anyway, where the quality declined. I mean, it kind of declined that much because I've watched all 5 series of it, because you know you can watch it as a performance piece. One can argue that. I mean, one can argue, yeah, that Kevin Spacey sort of is almost on autopilot. I don't think that's entirely fair or true. And even if he is on autopilot, watching him on autopilot is still better than many actors giving it their all. That's how good it is. I think it's well shot. And
Kevin Spacey is a very riveting actor. I saw him in Iceman Cometh on Broadway.
Yeah.
And he is one of those actors that doesn't have to say a word. It's somebody else's scene. And he's just listening, and your eye will still go to him. Not because he's doing anything, but because he's doing nothing. The hardest job in acting is not speaking, it's listening.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many actors do not know how to listen.
Do you want to name names? Or do you feel you damage your goodwill or your career? You can drop hints.
I think it's the majority of the average actor that I watch now. I mean, it's easier for me to think of really good actors. I have to really kind of dig down and think, who do I, you know, not like? Usually it's a television actor or something. But I love watching the Actor Studio programs. I love it when they interview real actors. And when I say real actors, they come from the theater. They're well trained. They do film now, and then they go back and they do theater because it feeds their soul. I think, you know, there are some actors who've grown quite a bit. They're only film actors. Julia Roberts has grown quite a bit in her career. I think she was a very, you know, cute romantic comedy girl in the 90s, and she's done some good work in the last few years, especially with Osage County. That was amazing. And she surprised me. I would have put her on that list of those actors who have mannerisms and things that need to be looked at. But film actors, lately I've been just really watching Jessica Chastain and Viola Davis. I loved Philip Seymour Hoffman, and was just devastated when he died because he was so brilliant. And probably one of our best American actors. And we're losing our actors. Most of the training is now, I think, better in Great Britain and Australia, which is interesting because we're the home of method acting, but I think that we're losing our body awareness on film.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, what is method acting at its core? Because I mean, I've always realized that a good actor, any kind of professional actor, you know, they can be as casual as they want, but the reality is that they're going to research a part. I mean, I mentioned sort of leading men earlier on, kind of the matinee idols or action venture guys like Harrison Ford and Tom Cruise. They are not what one thinks of when you hear method, but it's an open secret that guys like that do a lot of research and reading and preparation. They meet people who are, you know, perhaps in the trade that they're portraying, which is why they're very good at playing white-collar professionals. But this business, when I hear method, I think of Stella Adler, I think of Lee Strasberg, I think of potentially a very experimental art form which, in the wrong hands, or if underdeveloped, or if played with by somebody who's not intellectually or emotionally up to it, can actually harm rather than help the actor's journey.
It's very true. There is a very deep psychological process with method actors. And I studied with Austin Pendleton in New York, and he basically says, and I do agree, the best actors are method actors. Now, it depends on if you're doing different shows, the style will inform sometimes the different techniques. And I do think the best training are actors who know many different techniques and pull from the technique that is needed for the role. But when you're talking about doing Chekhov or maybe even Shakespeare, all the classics, or you're talking about any modern drama, you're talking about living in the vibration of that person. You're living in their skin. It's ultimately always you. That's why you're going to see 30 different Hamlets, because any choice you make is informed by your life. It's informed by your experience. My experience is vastly different from somebody else's experience. So I'm going to make choices that resonate with me. But our job as actors is to bring the words to life, but to bring them to life with truth. And the director's job is to steer the ship. And when we get off course, it kind of pulls us back and steers that ship into the right direction. We're trying to tell the story as truthfully as possible. There is research for sure, but then there's a point where you dump all of that. You don't need all of that. You are listening. You have something that you are deeply fighting for, and that you have the highest stakes possible. And then you have the obstacle of why you can't get what you want in that moment. And that's the job of the actor to figure that out.
Yeah,
it's a very good job.
Well, I mean, being quite natural about it, if you like. I mean, if we going back to politics for a second, people forget. Whatever about the disputed election of 2000 with Bush versus Gore. You go to 2004, and bear in mind this is after the invasion of Iraq, so he's got every reason to not look as popular as he was, and for people to be starting to get. But Bush wins that, and he wins against John Kerry. One of the reasons I think that happened was that he was literally the more natural performer. Kerry was much more studied. Kerry was somebody who had the book learning, had the career that had been a veteran and so on. But Bush had this sort of natural sort of comic timing, which you either have or you don't. And it was quite. I think it was warm. I think it was likable. I think whatever went on subsequently. And in politics as well, we did a podcast last week about Blair. Everybody has hindsight about Tony Blair, forgetting that but let's remember the guy won 3 elections, one of which was after the Iraq debacle. And I think in the same way with movies, I think there are actors who, even if they didn't use the method, I think they forget themselves that they just have an innate raw talent and a charm. So Pacino and De Niro are obviously the two that people think of when they think of the intense method. They're movie stars anyway, aren't they? I mean, even if they weren't method actors, if they could, we talked about winging it earlier on. They could literally just play themselves to some extent, and Pacino did. And even De Niro to some extent. They had a sort of a mid-career phase where I think they did a little bit of that. Took the paycheck for playing baddie of the week. Or...
One of the most method actors I can really name is Daniel Day-Lewis. He is pure method.
Yeah, and he's different in everything. There is no Daniel Day-Lewis template.
Well, he has very certain rules on when you're working with him, and that is, you don't call him by his real name, you call him by his character. This is the problem with method, because it can be a little bit. Now, I might actually understand this a little bit better, so let me go back a bit. I used to think it was very pretentious and very like, oh my God, just act, right? Because that's the old Laurence Olivier thing. Yeah. Hoffman was like, dear boy, have you ever tried acting? Here's the reality in film. There are millions of dollars on the line, and you only sometimes get 1 or 2 shots. You don't always get the millions it takes, and you're being hired because you are expected to get the job done and get the job done well. And method is very hard because in film, you're doing scene, and then you stop that scene and you do another setup, and it takes another 10 hours, 5 to 10 hours to do another setup, and you've got downtime. How do you stay in that, right? You're like, oh God, now I've got downtime, so I go to my trailer and try to just get some rest and do whatever. I have to keep myself prepped. you've got somebody there working on continuity, saying, hey, that last moment you were about ready to break down, so we're going to start from there, and you've got to find it again. And this is the part of film that I struggled with, because I've done film, but it is very, very hard, because you have to keep it at the same level. And when you have that, and you're shooting out of sequence, which is very difficult. Stage is everybody loves the theater people or the actors who've done theater, they love theater because it's beginning to end, and it's live, and you're getting that immediate feedback. Film, you don't get that immediate feedback, and a lot of the time, sometimes, it's not even your performance, it's the editor doing the performing for you. Editors, we have to remember this, editors do a lot of the work in terms of making an actor look good.
Yeah. That's a very stark admission, and obviously no actor, unless he's or she wishes to. I mean, it could backfire. It could go the other way. People might think, "Oh, you're incredibly honest to admit that." But I think most actors would probably go to great lengths to hide that. I think it's interesting. I was watching a fight scene in a movie a couple of months back. I'm not going to mention which movie it was. I'm not going to mention which actor it was, because I think if I mention who it is, I'm going to feel almost bad about it, but it's Tom Hiddleston, and it was Kong Skull Island. Sorry, it just popped out. What can I say? And there is a scene, and I'm sure, maybe he did stage it, maybe it's a trick of the camera and I missed it, but it looked like it was incredibly heavily edited. And that's no reflection on Tom. Maybe Tom is born to be an action hero. Maybe he's the James Bond we never had. My feeling is no, because it just didn't feel right. Whereas certain other actors, even if the editor does play a certain role in gifting them a particular style of choreography or something, you can feel a punch from them. You know that it would hurt. You know that there are certain moves that just feel right, a kind of visceral physical presence. And I go back to Pacino and De Niro yet again, because Pacino, I don't think I've ever felt him be a physical threat on film. For all of his brilliance. Whereas De Niro literally is a physical force of nature. To Pacino's credit, I don't think he's ever had to choreograph a fight scene or something like that, whereas De Niro did stuff like Raging Bull. But on the other hand, De Niro, being so kind of physical and projectile in his movement and his vocals, I don't think is as gifted at the silent stuff. Now, Pacino, and this is where I'd have given him an Oscar years before he did all that hoo-ha stuff in Scent of Woman and all that. The end of Godfather 2, it's a tableau. There's no speech at all. It's just him sat in a corner with his fist on his mouth, and he's in a cardigan. And Coppola, of course, and yes, as you point out, the editor and so on, and the lighting and everything is set up to portray it. But literally, the face alone tells an entire story. It tells the story of the movie, which is, I've beaten everybody, but at what personal cost? I'm now alone. I'm basically dead. To the extent that Part 3 is redundant, underrated though it is, because that single shot and that single bit of just silent movie acting. I think it's very interesting that Michael Keaton, who's coming back into his own and is having a kind of a second wind now, after a bit of a wilderness period.
That's the magic of growing older, I think.
Yeah.
Because if you're a really interesting actor, you can step back for a while and then come back.
Sure. But Keaton idolized Pacino by his own admission. And there's a shot in Batman Returns, of all things, the beginning of Batman Returns. And all the Batman fans hate this because it's just like, why does Batman have the bat signal so clearly in his house? If it were the real world, he'd get caught. And you just want to say, look, it's clearly a Tim Burton visual impressionistic thing. It's not, and it's a sodding comic book film, guys. He takes the bat signal down when he has guests. I don't know. But there's just a shot of Michael Keaton sat in his library it's an almost identical pose to Pacino, and it serves exactly the same purpose. It's sort of saying, look, the only thing I have in my life as Bruce Wayne really is waiting to be Batman. Everything else is an act, an irrelevance, a redundancy. And what's interesting is that both of those are quite silent performers, from two actors who are very verbal. Keaton, you mentioned Shakespeare earlier on. Keaton is a guy who, for me, I was quite daunted by studying Shakespeare in school, but Much Ado About Nothing, which is Kenneth Branagh. I still think Kenneth Branagh's best piece of work. It had, back before Branagh kind of fell in love with himself a bit and I think damaged his own progress, but that's another story. But he had the genius of casting Michael Keaton as Dogberry. And Michael Keaton sticks to Shakespeare's script, it's all there, but he gives it just a new life in little intonations and deliveries, which maybe are outside the poetic structure traditionally, and maybe add a kind of a subtext of Beetlejuice, sinister black comedy to it. But it's the fact that he's able to do that shows quite what an intelligent actor he is. I suspect he's method. And I suspect he doesn't shout about it. It's funny. I think there are some actors who shout about method. I think there are some who don't. I think there are some who probably keep it to themselves. That they do some method stuff. But that's
actors do.
Yeah.
Most actors have no problem saying I do method. I do method. Method's my predominant because it's the most honest. You have to do it on film. If you weren't method, you would be faking tears, or you'd be like, I'm going to start crying now. Oh, come on. But here's the thing about film work. Film is in the thinking process. It's not as much in the body. You're on a proceeding stage in front of 800 people. Everything has to be read in your voice and in your body and in your movement, right? That's where the training and the discipline comes in. Film work is all about the thought. I'll never forget when I studied film years and years ago, and I had to do a scene and I put it on tape. And the teacher, he was a brilliant teacher, he was so funny because he said, okay, great work, Jen. He said, but keep popping your eyebrow, He goes, imagine yourself on this giant movie screen and all we're seeing is the eyebrow move. You have to just have the thought. Trust me, you don't have to do anything with your face. Just think it. And I'll never forgot that because it's true. Actors on film think if they're good actors, everything is internalized because it's so much bigger on film.
Yeah. And I think that maybe there's an element of sort of trade secret to some extent. You don't necessarily want to be caught out doing it. You don't want to give away ideas. And maybe there's some inverted snobbery about it still. Maybe some people who believe that it's...
That's also great writing. I always know when there's a writing problem if I've guessed it. Yeah. I'm watching a movie and I'm like, oh yeah, like it happened on Game of Thrones in the last episode when the two sisters turned on Littlefinger. And I was sitting with my friend of mine and I said, oh yeah, I said, they're in on it together and what? I said, Littlefinger is going to get killed. She's like, no. And I said, nope, this is what's going to happen. Turned around and that's exactly what happened because it was too obvious.
Yeah. So that's because it's been telegraphed by both the writing and then the acting.
That's right. That's right. And also, I as a writer, because I am a writer as well, I sat there and I went, if I was a writer, I kind of want to do that too. It's just a natural temptation because it's a very thrilling moment. It's a moment of victory for the girls. That's sort of a plot structure archetype thing anyway. But, sometimes if you're watching a movie and you see it coming, you shouldn't see it coming and then it happens. You should say, oh yeah, that's going to happen. And then something else happens and you go, whoa, I did not see that coming.
Yeah.
And that's magic. That's good writing because you don't want to anticipate the plot.
So versatility is key then for any even just solid to good, not even great actor. You have to be kind of not even explicitly innately multi-skilled, but willing to learn new dimensions to a skill, willing to, I suppose, imitate real life skills, and therefore a certain dexterity. I mean, the thing that put me off sometimes, without being vain about this, without making this all about me for the umpteenth time, but hey, it's my podcast, so what the hell. Sometimes I've been asked when I've been a teacher or when I've been in business or other activities, people also say, well, why didn't you become an actor? And I still don't know the answer to that question. Well, I do know the answer to it. I mean, the uncertainty of the trade, the fact that you can't simply submit a CV and turn up for work one day and have a certain structure that's 9 to 5 that has a clear linear progress to it. And the second front is I can slag off from the sidelines any actor I want. Hiddleston, Cumberbatch, whoever, Dan Stevens, etc. The list is very long, but they're all successful, accomplished people who entertain a great many people, who are very decent human beings on the whole. And I think even the ones that aren't like that, even the ones who bathe in B-movie obscurity but manage to hold down a career as an actor, they all have one thing in common. Those people are willing and able to go out and not just get work, but consistently keep looking for it while they are midway through another project, while still giving everything they have to the project in hand. Yeah, and also competent, pervasive competence, because you have to be able to sing, dance, fight, whatever it is, do an impression of all of those things, and whether you do it incredibly well, and you're lucky, and it's mixed with a bit of luck and timing, as it always is. I mean, even Ewan McGregor said, look, being jammy, as he put it, is part of being an actor. Be the right place at the right time, get the right role, and you're set up. And that is true. But you've still got to have that versatility of skill, that dexterity, that ability to act. I mean, it's called acting, as in action.
What's that line is opportunity meets persistence, right?
Yeah.
It's just you have to keep going until the opportunity eventually does open up. And the trick is not to let the constant rejection, because any actor, I don't care who they are, and De Niro will say it, Pacino will say it, they were rejected a ton of times in the beginning. You know, Pacino and De Niro were rejected for a long time because of their height. They're not tall men. So, you know, what are they going to do about it? They're going to grow 4 or 5 inches? No, it's not going to happen. So they had to just persevere. And we've all done that. You know, I went through it recently. I went through a ton of auditions recently in which I was auditioning, and then I would get call back, second call back, cut. Call back, second call back, cut. But I cannot take that personally.
Yeah, but you are tall, aren't you? Just for the record. Actually, for the record, in case we don't have, in case there aren't visuals uploaded with this, there should be. But I'd like to think that Jennifer has a look of is it Andy McDowell and Groundhog? That's what was my and there's a bit of sort of. I mean, I think that I'm talking about a look of now. Don't get a swelled head, but sort of a look of the sort of. Scarlett when she's in the Avengers. We're not talking Scarlett Johansson in Match Point, that sort of thing. Just that sort of a look of, and sort of the animation of Madeline Kahn at her peak. People who don't know who Madeline Kahn is, A, shame on you. B, just go and Google.
Absolutely. When I work with casting directors, it's very important for actors to know who they're going to be perceived as. Yep. Not what you want to do. It doesn't matter what you want to do. I may be dying to play Blanche Dubois. I'm never going to get cast as Blanche Dubois. So it's very important to know how you're perceived. And I figured that out very early in my career that I was a comedian. I certainly did drama as well, but that was my first point of entry, how I got my foot in the door. And I basically said to a casting director, she looked at me and she says, how would you describe yourself? I said, if Carol Burnett and Madeline Kahn had a love child, that would be me. And she laughed. She says, perfect, because you're right. And that's, I see myself more as a Carol Burnett. In fact, I've been told, when I've been reviewed in shows, I've been compared, highest praise as far as I'm concerned, I've been compared to her. And that's, I would say that's true. I love the Andy McDowell. I don't think it's very true. But,
well, same hair, I don't know. Plus, you know, I'm English, you're American, you never know. What can I say? So the idea is that versatility, maybe not necessarily within the craft then, but outside of the craft, if you like. I mean, I'm talking about, I think, the skill to just be an incredibly hard worker, but to work at the work, at the getting of the work, to have no sense of entitlement, and to have it, yeah, as you point out, and quite rightly, Jen, the idea of a complete survival, raw, hungry instinct, or, and this is one of the brutal realities, particularly you mentioned the British system, to be connected from day one. And what I'm seeing is a trend in terms of who gets nominated as a star nowadays, be it from America or Britain or wherever. Either they're hungry and raw from day one and they had to fight to even get on the ladder. You John Boyega's. I suspect the kid I just saw in Kingsman, Taron Egerton, I could have that wrong. He may be from the most moneyed, plush background in the world, but he's able to capture that sense of rawness. Or you come from an entertainment background. Your family have the wealth and the connections to get you in. Now, there's nothing wrong with that inherently if you've inherited the talent that got them there in the first place and you have the same work ethic. But it doesn't hurt either. And I think if you're exposed to the trade, as with anything, you know, I mean, some of the best teachers that I knew when I taught, when I have been teaching, have been people who just have it in their blood. They're parents' teachers, and perhaps it's the same for acting. But I mean, did you have acting in your family, or any of your family in the trade?
You inherit creativity. That is not something in your DNA.
No.
Your 2-year-olds who start showing that they are great movers. They can dance. I mean, how do you? Why is that? Well, it's inherently in them, and I think maybe if their parent was a dancer, you see this all the time. My mother was an opera singer, so yeah, I was born with a voice. I'm not an opera singer, but that's, you know, because I chose to go a different route. But you do inherit acting, and I read an interesting article about this. I'm trying to remember when and how recently what that article was. But I think it was to the point where, you know, is acting something that's in your DNA? Is it already there? And I think it is. I think there might be something, an experience in your childhood that draws it out a little further. But parents for slaves and a lot of that. And somebody asked her, how did you survive? How do you think you even became an actor? She said, because I dreamed. I had so much imagination. My sisters and I would imagine, and that's where it starts. It's that play. They don't call it a play for nothing. It's play. That's what acting is. It's imagination times 100.
Yeah. But you also have to have a practical side to it too. You have to be able to realize the vision to do that. And I think if you're somebody who's dreaming, may be very powerful, but the dreaming is kind of insular, and perhaps their skill base isn't, as externalized, then maybe you're going to have a bit of a problem.
Well, but that's when you start taking acting classes. I was 7 and 8 when I started taking children's acting classes, because what you're doing is that you're encouraging the play. We have that drummed out of us. When we're 13, 14, 15 is when it starts. You have to start going to school and learning and being practical, as you say, and it's discouraged. We stop encouraging children to have that mindset of like having fun, and that's what you don't want to do, right? You want to encourage that sense of play as an actor.
Yeah, but once again, any of the people that we've mentioned, be they very physical actors. Harrison Ford even talks about physical act. Like people say, aren't you too old to your own stunts? And he has to keep saying again and again, stunt work is not the same as physical acting. Physical acting is what he does. He's not a stunt man. Kevin Spacey, interesting point. I think he went to a military school and he therefore has a certain physical presence. But I think by his own admission, he's not going to be an action hero. He's not in a lot of action parts. And yet something like Rich III, and he's one of the definitive Rich IIIs. And I think this is something where we disagree, because we can't agree on everything, Jen, and that's fine. One of the reasons I think he's such a good Rich III is that he's somebody who managed to relish the sheer monologue to villainy, what I call the panto villain. That's not to demean the craft or the art of it, but just to somehow get the subtlety through a kind of not being overtly subtle, if you like, if that's not a contradiction in terms.
Which actor are you talking about?
Spacey. Quite clear and open, he and Mendes, about the fact that yes, there are subtle vulnerabilities to Rich III, but you mine those through, letting go of the sheer wanton villainy, the physicality of it.
I would not argue that he probably was brilliant, and I am a huge Spacey fan.
But what I'm saying is that both of those, be it Harrison Ford doing Indiana Jones nearing 80, or Kevin Spacey pulling off one of the definitive Rich IIIs, or I'll say at least 2 or 3 great seasons of House of Cards, even though the rest are sort of meh to me, but everyone else loves it, so I'm probably wrong, what can I say? But either side, whether you're playing a psychological villain who's monologuing to the camera, or whether you're whipping a bullwhip, be you 40 or 80, whatever age Harrison's going to be when he does his last one, if it is his last, you have to have a kind of a physical innate coordination that can't be learned. If you were, I don't know. There are dyspraxic actors. Will Poulton, who was in Detroit and was very nearly Pennywise the Clown, he's famously dyspraxic, and he's overcome the dyspraxia to become an actor. But I think he's quite honest about the fact that it is that bit more difficult when you have something like that, where your coordination is impaired.
Who that you're talking about?
His name, you might not have heard of him because he's not a household name yet, but his name is Will Poulter, if you Google him. He was in Detroit with another English actor, John Boyega, the Catherine Bigelow film.
I did not know that about it, but, Tom Cruise has severe dyslexia.
Yeah, but that's just reading the script or something. Do you know what I mean? Tom Cruise can run the shit out of anything, and he has that physical ability to learn a new skill. Like if Tom Cruise, this is what people don't get about Tom Cruise. He will learn every day a new skill.
When Tom Cruise grew up, though, he talked about being very insecure because of the dyslexia. And you see, this is where it gets interesting, because what if that could have run him? That could have been like, okay, I can't do anything. I don't feel good about anything that I do, so I'm just not going to, pursue it. And having any kind of learning disability can be a huge hindrance psychologically.
Yeah, but it's beatable. What would you do? Go to an occupational therapist or something? If there are budding actors out there who are missing out.
Well, you will always have dyslexia. It's not going to change. You just learn to work around it, and you tell people, I have dyslexia. If I had dyslexia and I had to go to an audition in which I had to there's cold reading and there's
Yeah.
Ice cold reading is, here's the script. You don't even have a chance to look at it. You have to get into it. If you had dyslexia, you can't ice cold read. You have to prepare. So you have to be able to say, listen, I have dyslexia. I can't ice cold this. I'm going to have to go back and look at it. And they're like, okay, no problem.
Well, they've got a legal obligation now, haven't they? Because it is a disability, isn't it? To some extent. And to not make the disability a handicap. But dyspraxia is slightly different, because I would imagine, I'm not admitting to in any way suffering from dyspraxia. Not that there's anything wrong with it, dyspraxics out there, fellow dyspraxics. Oh shit, I just said. But the idea is that something as simple, potentially, depending on what stage of the spectrum you're on, as stage left, stage right, click, click, click. You've got, with the most patient, accommodating theatre or director in the world, you still have to have a certain grace and movement and an ability to refine and I suppose hone your skill set and move in a particular way. Is that fair to say? And particularly with nowadays, I mean, you mentioned the Marvel saturation. The god role at the moment is to get yourself into a superhero film of some sort, or an action part. Still, we've overcome so much as a society, but still the pinnacle of achievement for either a man or a woman appears to be, can I be the action star? Which is
my theory is on something like that is if you're working with a director who's really open, and they say they like your work, but you do have certain hindrances. And let's just say, with the dyspraxia, you're going to move a certain way, or going to have a certain gait, or what have you. Here's the thing: you make who you are part of that character. So it becomes. You don't try to make it not happen. It's not going to happen. It's like trying to grow 10 feet, right? It's not going to happen. So you have to just. You work with a director who says, hey, I really like your work. I think your work is amazing. So let's incorporate this into the role. If it can work that way, okay? That isn't always the case, but if it can, the best advice I ever got in a scene work / audition situation was from Austin. Basically said,
So just to cut you off midstream there, because and I hate doing that, but I'm consciously aware, Jennifer, of time ticking away. So listeners, if you were cut off there and you've missed out on an outstanding monologue, my apologies. But I do also remember that I set Jennifer some homework, and I would be a very poor teacher if we didn't follow that up. So the first thing is, I need you to tell us about the voice, because we've talked about movement and we've talked about how we can overcome that. Maybe one of the reasons I cut it was it's just too painful, because I'd be out of excuses by the end of a talk with you. It's like having a life coach rather than we're supposed to be a chat about acting, and by the end of it you think, actually, if you listen to what Jennifer is saying, you could probably, if you're determined enough to become an actor, just go off and bloody do it and get it done. So I can no longer say I was what Hollywood and the British stage missed out on. I can no longer vicariously live through actors, and I can no longer take the mickey out of the ones who I feel I'd have done a better job than. But what I would say is voice is something that I think is important to any successful actor, because you've got to be distinctive. And equally, accent and being able to maybe do accents. And the British actors, notoriously, find it difficult to do an American accent particularly well. When an American does a British one, it's a thing of beauty.
Voice and diction are very different things. Voice is being able to actually speak with, it's not even conviction, but being on full voice as opposed to film, which is this new thing, this vocal fry, which is driving me nuts. It's that Valley Girl thing of people sitting into their voice. It's very popular on film now, and it's quite annoying. And it's usually actors who cannot do theater will do that. They don't have any real training. Accents, yes, and you will see more and more actors. They have to be good at that, and accents that they'll be reasonably cast in. I haven't bothered to learn an East Indian accent because I'm probably not going to get cast as an East Indian, so I don't bother. But you take a look at your look and you say, okay, I'm going to be cast as X, Y, Z. For me, it's a lot of European and East European roles, so I learned the accent. But I also grew up in London, so I had very early exposure to a lot of different dialects, and I was just a sponge. I was very good at it instinctively, so it helped me a lot.
But having a good voice is different to, having a distinctive voice is different to being good with accents. I mean, one of the things is, doing an impression of an actor and getting stuck with that, or certain actors who sound alike even. There are some actors who are movie stars partly because of a very distinctive voice. It does not prevent them being character actors. So one that comes to mind is Jack Nicholson, who has a very distinct. I'm trying to do Jack Nicholson there. I do it better in person, but he has that very distinctive voice that is very. You can tell it's a Jack Nicholson film, no matter what film you're watching. But he's still playing a very different character, no matter what. He just weaponizes his voice differently, but it is his voice always. He doesn't bother with. And I think the one time he tried accents was for a film called Hoffa for Danny DeVito as director, and it kind of doesn't work because he's sort of trying to do an accent, but he's still trying to do the Jack thing, and it's not quite working.
That's the thing. You gave a good example of what I call an iconic actor, and there are actors like him that really can't disappear into roles.
Yeah.
Okay.
He can, but his voice can't.
Jack Nicholson act, unlike say Daniel Day-Lewis, who can disappear. You don't know him role to role.
No. But I think Nicholson. It's a weird thing because he is a movie star. One of the reasons we miss Jack Nicholson, or at least I miss Jack Nicholson, I think it's a shame that he's retired a couple of years early. Not that I begrudge him that, but I missed the event of turning up to the pictures to see Big Jack fill the screen, bounce out of it with the shades on, do his thing. But that never detracted from the sense that in each and every case, he still managed to convey a very different character. Melvin, in As Good as It Gets, I think he takes the OCD bit too far, bearing in mind that he actually was envious of Dustin Hoffman playing Rain Man. I think he wanted to play full-on autistic. But he won his Oscar fair and square there because he really does get this man, Melvin, being locked inside the OCD. But you still get all the trappings of a Jack Nicholson performance because when he leaps out, like an attacking cobra, when he's in his bully phase at the beginning. Another one, bit like he and Bill Murray actually got cast for almost interchangeably. There were certain movies because Bill Murray, I think, was offered Witches of Eastwick, and Nicholson was offered Groundhog Day, stuff like. There's certain overlap, but they're both very good at that sort of. You get a story and you get a character performance, but you also get the fun of watching the misanthrope before they reform, if you like, having sort of the fantasy dimension to it. And we were talking about Pacino earlier on. He has managed to divide in quite a linear fashion his big shouty performances, which he's almost phoning it in doing the hoo-ha stuff, from the more studied, slow, kind of quite tender, intimate character work that he does in something like Donnie Brasco or Godfather,
Pacino is a very good example of somebody who can't do certain things at all. He tried to do something like Finding Richard, I think he was Finding Richard.
Looking for Richard, documentary, yeah. Which features Spacey, actually.
But as I'm talking about Pacino, what brings to mind is he is so sort of iconic and so American that it's almost off-putting to hear him try to do language and find that rhythm because he can't disappear into it. So all I kept hearing is, I'm hearing Pacino. I feel like it's the Godfather playing Shylock, or whatever. He did I know he also did Merchant of Venice with a friend of mine, actually, with Viola Lynn Collins, who played Portia.
Right.
And he was Shylock, and I've done that play. I've actually played Portia, and it's not one of my favorite shows. But his Shylock was horrible. He just was so miscast on every level.
Should it be a Jewish actor, if possible? Is that really narrow-minded?
I don't want to go there because I actually had the same exact conversation. But it can't be, a Jersey Italian. That's the problem. It's like it doesn't have to be a Jewish actor, but it has to be somebody who is capable of letting go of a certain rhythm that they already have or can, and he can't do that. There are just certain actors that can't do that.
Or when they do, it's not nice to watch. So, for example, an actor and indeed a movie star. Now, we talked about action earlier on. It's an interesting point. And we talked about Annie McDowell. Obviously, Four Weddings and a Funeral, 23 years ago now, was a huge, big deal. And it didn't launch Hugh Grant because he'd been a working actor for several years before that. But it made him a star. No one had, he wasn't a household name. First thing that happens when that became a huge hit, number one, of course, British actor. At the time, they were recasting James Bond. Pierce, of course, had it in the bag, but it didn't do Four Weddings box office any harm, the association with Bond, potentially. And equally, vice versa. GoldenEye, in turn, I think, had a bit of a Four Weddings vibe to it. The two benefited from each other. But Hugh was getting offered lots of action stuff, so it wasn't beyond the bounds of possibility that he would be Bond or something like that. He was offered The Saint, for example, and he was very clear. He sort of said, "Look, I'm just not convincing in an action part." And what's interesting is this is a guy who in real life is something of an athlete. He's a scratch golfer, and he's not actually a bad actor either. He became a byword for bad acting. But what people forget is, you compare Daniel Cleaver and Bridget Jones to Charles in Four Weddings. Very different characters. Same genre, sure, but very different types. And he has done some really quite menacing, creepy villains, albeit in kind of B-movie shtick, or schlock or whatever. But he did one very studied one with the late Alan Rickman a couple of years ago, about 20 years ago, sorry, just after Weddings, called An Awfully Big Adventure. And he was brilliant in that, and he was good in a Woody Allen piece. And he's got one coming for BBC. He's going back to BBC, and he's going to do... he's back to politics. He's going to play a disgraced Liberal MP called Jeremy Thorpe, who was secretly gay, I think. Yeah, Thorpe, I think, was part of a... You can't have heard of Jeremy Thorpe. Have you heard of Thorpe? You Googling him. Jen, are you secretly Googling Jeremy Thorpe?
No, I actually got another call in. That's why what just happened? So it's okay.
Well, look, if it's an audition or something, I can wing the rest of this. But Hugh is not famed for being a character actor. So you wouldn't make him Shylock, and he's not famed for being a Shakespeare actor either. But equally, all actors, if they get any kind of profile, as I said right at the beginning, to the extent that I often wonder, is there really any such thing as a bad actor, even if they are a movie star and they're distinctive in their presence? Is it just that, as with any profession, you get specialists?
There are bad actors the way that there are bad singers. I mean, of course there are bad actors. And bad actors are almost, you just kind of go, oh God. I mean, if you just go to see any bad community theater production, you go, oh God, there's 2 hours of my life that I don't get back. They're that bad. And yes, there's not as many bad film actors because it's very expensive to produce a film now, and you have to have good people in them to get other people to see the show. So, but are there bad actors? Of course, there's plenty of them. Just look around, there are plenty of them. But I think some of the bad, I would say the badness that I see in film is a lot of it's miscast. Mm-hmm. It would be like if Hugh Grant was cast as Bond. He's not. He's a lovable, in his 20s and 30s, or rather in the 90s when he was working. He's sort of the lovable Brit neurotic, kind of like the British version of Woody Allen.
Yeah.
Sweet and uptight, and it worked. It's perfect for him. Can he do other things? Yeah, I loved him in Florence Foster Jenkins. I mean, I thought he was that was a very different role for him, in my opinion, and I thought he was sort of gracefully aging into a rather...
Yeah, he was remarkably unvain, wasn't it? He didn't look handsome.
No. He aged. I mean,
yeah.
He's been aging, and that's the reality. But I also find him to be a very honest actor when he's in a moment.
Yeah.
Yes, he's not going to play that. He's an interesting type because he's a leading man, but he's not a classic leading man.
Yeah.
He's a classic character lead, and it's a crossover that's very hard to make happen. But there was a movie that he did way back in the day before he got famous, and he played Chopin.
I know that one. I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great, and I can't remember. Emma Thompson was wonderful in it, and Judy Davis played Geo-Storm, and he was wonderful.
Is it impromptu? I didn't have to look that up.
Yes, it was impromptu, and I loved that movie because the characters were so interesting to me. But he was just so melancholy, and he was so desperate. And it was so. I thought, who is this guy? This is before he got famous. So when I was watching, I thought, who is this guy? He's really interesting. And that's a word that I look for when I look for new actors. I want to see an interesting actor, somebody who makes interesting choices.
Oh, bless! I'm just seeing the pictures. Oh, he's so young, and I feel so old. Oh, he was like one of my childhood heroes. Damn it! Age is a terrible thing. Dear, oh dear, old age, awful. No, I mean very nice. So it's great to survive to old age and stuff. But God, the creator was having an off day when he designed that one. But what I'm saying is that vocal, like anything in acting or indeed in any trade, a weakness is an overdone strength. So if your voice is too distinctive, as you mentioned with Nicholson, it can actually count against what might otherwise be a perfectly serviceable good actor. It can be an asset in the sense it gives you star power and makes you distinctive, but it can also make it difficult to even do something like an accent. Now, you've trained some famous people in accents. Is it okay to name names, or is it all confidential? Or?
I was a dialect coach back in the 90s. I stopped coaching largely because I didn't want to get known as a dialect coach. I wanted to be known as an actor. But the big film that I did was a movie called The Con, and it was written by and directed by Stephen Schachter and stars William H. Macy and Rebecca DeMornay, Francis Sternhagen, a few pretty good character actors, some of which I actually know today. And my first kind of foray on a film set that it was inundated with stuff was that movie and working with William H. Macy. And I remember our first conversation in the trailer. It was actually pretty funny. I said, I just have to say something. And he just looked at me. I was very serious about this. He said, okay. And I said, I looked at him and I was referencing Fargo because Fargo had come out the year before. And Fargo is one of my most favorite movies I've ever seen. It's one of the best Ethan Coen films, the Coen brothers. And his work was amazing. And I looked at him square in the eye and I said, oh my God, you were robbed. Because Jerry Maguire won for Best Supporting that year. I believe it was, his name, but I was so angry that the other actor won it, and I wanted him to win. So I said, I just got that out of my system. I said, okay, we can move forward now, but I just have to say you were robbed, and he just kind of laughed his ass off. That was really fun.
Oh.
And I had a chance to talk to him and get to know him a little bit, and through the course of that filming, he invited me to go up to study in Vermont, and he was going to be teaching with David Mamet at the Atlantic Theater School. And, one does not pass up those opportunities.
But you rate Mamet very highly. In fact, I think it was you who recommended that his book on directing and writing is something that sort of an essential read, isn't it?
I think it's a very important read. He also has manuals for acting. I would prefer to steer clear of those because I don't think that.
Well, because he's not an actor, is he? I mean, he's a writer.
Well, this is a very interesting story about Mamet. What people don't know is he was first an actor, and he did study at the Neighborhood Playhouse in New York, but as an actor, he was cut. And he was very angry about that. He did not like the fact that Sanford Meisner cut him from the program, so he kind of bastardized the program and turned that into the Atlantic Theater Company. There's an exercise called repetition, which is a Meisner technique. He does the same thing, and he calls it that, but he calls it something a little bit different. I think the classic Atlantic Theater School technique is awful. I think it's very mechanical. I spent several weeks studying it, and I didn't like it until actually Macy said, hey, it's one road. There are many roads to LA, right? There's many freeways. You can take a number of them and you'll still get there. In other words, you have to do a technique that resonates with you. And that technique did not resonate with me at all.
Interesting. And what about Rebecca? Is she as lovely in person as she is on film?
She is. In fact, she's quite shy.
Oh.
And she is darlingly shy. And the first conversation I had with her, I met her at the hotel, and she is white as a ghost. I am not exactly the tannest person either. I'm pretty fair. But they actually had to put makeup on her so that the light wouldn't bounce off her skin because she's almost albino. She's so white. So that was the first stark thing I noticed about her. These big, beautiful ice blue, sort of husky eyes. But I remember when I was talking to her and we were making introductions, I said, I have to tell you something funny. That I was watching Seinfeld last night, and there was a character in there. Her name was Rebecca DeMornay. And she said, what? And I said, yeah. Swear to God, Google it. Well, I said Google it or something. I don't remember if there was a Google.
I think, yeah, probably.
Yeah, this was back this was 20 years ago. And I said, you have to look it up. But it was so weird because I'm watching it last night thinking, I'm meeting you tomorrow. And she was so blown away. She said, that is weird. That is so weird. I said, well, somebody on Seinfeld obviously loves you.
Yeah.
So,
maybe it's the Curb Your Enthusiasm guy. Didn't he write for Seinfeld? You know Curb Your Enthusiasm?
Oh, I loved Larry David. He's actually coming back on again.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing the trailers and stuff. He's a bit of a misanthrope. I'm surprised you can watch that because one of the things that comes across about you, is Jen, is that you're very proactive and positive, and there's a show that's immersed in sort of get off my lawn misanthropy, But maybe that's why, I don't know. Maybe even
very typical archaic Jewish humor, and growing up with a Jewish family on one side, I get that New York biting wit more than you realize, and I do think it's very acerbic, but it's very funny. And again, when the writing is good, you forgive it. And
hello, have you gone? You gone?
No,
You still there? Oh yeah. So when the writing is funny, you can forgive the fact that the hero is slightly flawed.
Very much so. And besides, the hero needs to be flawed. Every character needs to have a flaw. It is not interesting to see a perfect person.
Yeah.
I could care less about why. I will not watch something where the hero is just perfect.
Oh, don't get me started. This is why writing a screenplay is so bloody difficult, particularly by today's standards, because our modern morality, our current morality, is on the one hand a great breath of fresh air because we're a lot more open and tolerant and yada, 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 but we're also a lot less tolerant of quite basic flaws and failings, which are now regarded as un-PC or whatever. But I don't want to, if hypothetically speaking, I were in the middle of writing a 5th draft of a screenplay, which is ongoing, you're trying to please everybody to some extent, and then you have to step back and say, well, I know I can't do that, so I've just got to write from the heart and go with it. And then you realize, actually, it is somewhere in between, because there is a minefield of social politics to navigate in today's world, which means that making a hero likable, and they still must be likable to some extent, even if they're not a hero in the strict sense, but just the protagonist. Very, very difficult in today's world, because we're so... because our real world, I suppose, has opened up so much, which is a very good thing in many senses, but from a creative standpoint. And I think that's maybe why period pieces are coming back, stuff set in the 80s and the 90s, partly because of natural sentiment and cycle, but also because I think it's a safer space to write things like pulp thrillers, and even comedy to some extent, because it was the beginnings of the PC movement, but we were still quite entrenched in old habits, everything from, it was okay to smoke, through to it was okay to flirt or swear or, have the occasional bar fight or whatever it is that heroes do in those movies, but there you go. Anyway, I can't monopolize your time forever, but before you go, if you had sort of a top list of performances that you go back to and watch that just knock you out, really stream of consciousness stuff off the top of your head.
Yeah, I actually came back on the cable too. You were talking a lot about Kevin Spacey. I love American Beauty.
Yeah.
All the performances are great. There are a handful of movies that I love because of the iconicness of it. Some Like It Hot.
Yes.
It's one of my old favorites. I was a huge Jack Lemmon fan. I love Gene Hackman too. So a lot of I will always go back. I miss him. He's retired. He's an artist in Nevada, I believe. But I do miss him.
He's a man's man. He's an old school, masculine, competent all-rounder. Yes, much missed. I mean, he's still alive, but much missed on screen. I mean,
Much missed on screen.
Yeah.
But these are classic actors. I love Emma Thompson. When I was growing up when I was in my 20s, I used to love pretty much anything that she was in. But Sense and Sensibility was a beautiful movie, and I love her because she's obviously such a great writer. She's already proven herself to be a screenwriter. She's a great actress. I'm waiting for her to direct because I think she's going to be a great director as well. And so that kind of polemic is just, I just believe.
Yeah, no, she's very sexy. I adore her.
I adore her too. I think she's wonderful. I love a lot of the old school British actors. Having grown up there, I love the sense of humor. John Cleese. One of my favorite shows that got me into acting was Fawlty Towers. And the reason I love that show is that it's patently absurd. Yes, of course, but it's a great lesson for actors in stakes, in raising the stakes.
Yeah.
No matter how absurd it is to the audience, it's not absurd to the characters. And any movie and any performance that shows me that, I love. I love Julianne Moore, Viola Davis, Jessica Chastain. These are, and the actors, as I said, I love Philip Seymour Hoffman was going to be quite a wonderful. He was going to have longevity, and unfortunately, it's cut short by.
That's the evils of drugs.
Yeah, I mean, Heath Ledger was another one too. He was another one who was going to show the world that he was going to be quite the actor.
Yeah, and yet, funnily enough, if you look at that Joker performance, if there is ever a legacy, because that has so many layers to it. We talk about research and method. He was not somebody who necessarily gave away all his tricks, but he was quite open about the fact that, yeah, he did some hardcore research in terms of how to bring a definitive villain to the screen and got inside the mindset of the Joker without going over the top with it. So he,
I think that was one of the things that killed him. It gave him a sleeping disorder, and he was taking a lot of drugs.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that I think in retrospect, of course he'd have had longevity in his career, but in terms of a masterpiece for which, yeah, he kind of gave so much to that it killed him. That's just a great work of art that will last forever. He would never have topped it, I don't think.
That's the work of actors. When you do, you have to be a very psychologically balanced person to really utilize the method well.
And he was too young. I mean, he was what, 28? You're not old enough for that, necessarily.
But you are. If you've had trauma in your life and you haven't really resolved something, then it's going to affect you. And that is the problem. And actors often don't want to resolve things because they think that it will affect their work. And the truth of the matter is it will contain your work. I can draw on any number of traumas I've had in my life. I can bring them out for work, and then I can pack them away again so that I can have a balanced, healthy life. And that's something that I work with my clients all the time, is that does not have to define who you are going forward. And a lot of performers love that. They love that reveling in their addictions and their stuff because, hey, it makes me a better actor. And I'm like, no, it makes you a bullshit artist, and it will make you sick.
Well, we go back to Olivier, who on the one hand hated the method, but he also said all actors are basically thieves. They steal from each other and they steal from, what they perceive to be kind of the accepted method. But I think what's interesting about the performances that you listed just off the top of your head, or the actors, there's a great continuity with what we were talking about earlier on. So John Cleese, for example, we don't think of him as an actor. I mean, erroneously, he's thought of as a comedian, when he is in fact an actor and he's a writer. There are moments of Fawlty Towers which just have such good acting, aside from the fact that it's hilarious and it's clever and it's well conceived and structured. There's one moment where his wife, Sybil, who on the one hand, she's brilliantly played as well by Prunella Scales, and it was written with Connie Booth, who plays the Polly, his ex-wife, yeah. One of his ex-wives. But there's this moment where Sybil, played by Prunella Scales, has been taken in for an ingrown toenail operation in hospital, and he just says to the anaesthetist, he goes, "Can I just ask, will she be in quite a lot of pain?" The guy says, "Yes, probably quite a lot of pain," and he utilizes his whole body. He steps forward, and you can see because he's a very virile man. He's a very tall bloke. He kind of weaponizes his body, moves forward, then moves back, and he's quite a lot of pain. Yes. And so he doesn't have to say explicitly what the subtext there is, and they don't have to overlabor it. It's one line. And they capture racism in a split second. A black doctor comes in, and Fawlty just jumps back and goes, "Raw," as if like he's never seen a black guy before. And it's stuff which,
everything about the character. This is a great exercise in not just the writing, but these characters were so well developed.
And they exist. And you mentioned Julianne Moore. I've just come back from Kingsman. I may or may not review it. I've done it as a Facebook rant already. I mean, it's not a great film. It has some spectacular action. It has some lovely moments, but unfortunately those lovely moments are undercut by excessively kind of nouveau riche public school, second-rate public school, dorm boy, pup, kind of frat boy, puerile, inverted, snobbish, kind of derivative crap. But the action and the atmospherics and the acting, incidentally, are all excellent and kind of make it redeemably watchable. Julianne is not actually in her element there. It's the first time I've actually seen her acting, where you can see her acting, where she's not immersed in it. And you can see that maybe deep down she just wasn't completely 100% ready with it, or maybe it was a paycheck part, whatever it was. She's trying to give it her all, but,
It's their style that doesn't fit the actor, and sometimes that does happen. You know, and I noticed this with comedic actors and dramatic actors. Comedic actors do drama very well because their comedy is based on their life pain. Dramatic actors do not understand necessarily. They haven't done a lot of comedy. They don't understand comic timing, which is very much like reading sheet music.
Yeah.
It's very hard to teach that. It's very instinctive. And I mean, have you ever seen Ray Fine trying to do comedy? It doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he works particularly well as M either in the Bond movies. I think, and what you know, what we were saying, what I was saying, or what we were both agreeing on about Heath Ledger earlier on. Obviously, I don't wish Ray Fiennes any harm, so please don't have me arrested or anything. But let's say there's an alternate universe where he died after making Schindler's List. Yeah?
Oh, he was brilliant in that.
I don't think you can top that. I think it's such a mesmeric, studied, subtle piece of acting that manages to tell 1,000 stories in it. And it's partly a collaboration with Spielberg. But I have never seen him top that. I've seen him be competent. I mean, he was excellent in The Constant Gardener. He was good in English Patient. He's another one who doesn't quite cut it with action, funnily enough, despite being, once again, a very virile, handsome, dynamic, physical guy.
It's another style, and not every actor can do every style.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, I love action. I just got back from watching several weeks ago. I loved it because I wanted to have fun. I wasn't watching it for great acting. I was like, I want to watch it for the style of this piece. I loved Atomic Blonde, and I loved Charlize Theron in it. And I think she's an interesting one because she does a lot of action. She got action films largely because of Mad Max, but she's done, these big summer blockbuster films. And I look at her and I'm like, oh, well, she's not that great of an actress. But then you look at Monster, and she was brilliant in it. Sometimes really hard to kind of figure out what are these actors good at. Atomic Blonde was just a fun summer romp, but great action. And she immersed herself 150% in it. She did most of all of her own stunts. Cracked her teeth, from what I understand. The commitment, and that's what I love about any actor, is the commitment to the work, whatever that work is.
Yeah, no, she's able to reinvent her own look quite substantially, to the extent that one of the things that's constantly talked about on this podcast, partly because I'm a fan, partly because lots of people are into it, and partly because the moment you write it in a post, it gets thousands of clickbait hits. Frequently people talk about, Bond and who should be in a Bond movie. Well, she managed to do okay in a Fast and the Furious movie, and I really enjoyed her in that. I mean, obviously it's not, Oscar-winning stuff or anything, but there is I think I've not pitched it officially, but I've mentioned it on certain fan forums and sort of said, well, if you took an actress like Charlize, you could probably do one of the old school Bond tropes, which is where you have a beautiful girl and then you have a slightly uglier villain girl. You could have a new modern spin on that, where what if it's the same woman, somebody who's able to reinvent their whole look? Because the thing is, they are, the Fleming novels certainly are sort of adult fairy tales. It's something that I think certain movies try to ape. And even the Bond series itself sometimes forgets that this is what they are. But you can't get much more fairy tale than an actress who can go from literally playing the kind of the fairy tale princess to then being the wicked queen in a split second. And Charlize, boy oh boy, can she do that. Nicole Kidman's another one who does that.
I think the Bond franchise really looks for women, for the most part, who are lesser known. They're not. I mean, Halle Berry is kind of an exception, but a lot of the women, when I go back and I think about the Bond franchise, they were not well known to the screen at the time.
No.
They existed, and I think that's it's because it would take away from the energy of who Bond is, because we want to focus on Bond, right? Charlize is too much of an A-list actress to be cast. Could she do a Bond girl? I think so, but she's kind of put the villain out so many times. I think it would be kind of bland to make that choice, to be honest.
Yeah. Nicole Kidman could do it as well. Nicole Kidman's another one who can reinvent her entire DNA almost physically in a split second. She can go from, bearing in mind, it's a 50-year-old woman who can still look, contrary to popular bitching, it's not because of cosmetic surgery. She just looks really good for her age because she keeps herself in shape. And then in a split second,
she's known in the community for doing a ton of Botox. Her face is frozen.
Okay, her face may be frozen, but it's still a beautifully frozen face, and she can go from that beautifully frozen face to a really, there's a terrible phrase which I shouldn't use, having blame Kingsman that I've been put into that sort of boarding school mode again. Moosey, you can moose up, as in like, you go from beautiful to being, how should I put this, less easy on the eye without being too superficial on it. And Nicole is very good at that. You give her a false nose or something and she can inhabit a completely different persona while still keeping a very graceful body language that's very distinctly her. Still a movie star, still a Hitchcock blonde in waiting or a redhead, but she can vary her appearance and style and so on. Leia Seydoux, another one who is a Bond girl, who either comes back or she doesn't. My big theory was, what if they make her Blofeld, make her the big villain, and have him marry her, and have her turn out to be a baddie. I think I keep pitching it, I keep shouting it if it happens enough. Or they give him, just because I sneak this into every podcast, a happy ever after, like Batman, a cafe in Florence. You never know. But anyway, before I let you go, James, obviously at some point, sadly, I have to do that. Plug yourself, your services, so to speak, to the wider community here. Have you got a Twitter feed, a website, that sort of thing, Facebook page? Fire away.
I do. I can send that off to you. Yeah, I have all of that.
Do it verbally here so that they remember it. It's ringing in their ears.
You can find me on Whole Health Harmony, HOL, Health Harmony. I don't have a website for my acting because I just kind of took a step down for that for a little bit. And I think that's really basically it.
Have you got an IMDb page or something? Or?
No, my focus is not film.
If they Google you, if people Google you, will they get to you?
If they Google me, they probably will find a ton of old reviews from shows. Yeah, you will, the internet kind of never dies. So I can be Googled. You're going to find a lot of information from me about a lot of different things. I've written for a Fringe Festival. There's probably a couple of reviews on that. But yeah, you'll find me. You just won't find me in IMDb.
And your name is real. It's not a stage name.
It is not a stage name. It's a family name. So,
just say it for the purpose of the podcast, in case I get it, in case I mispronounce a beat of it. Jennifer.
Yeah, it's Doctorovich.
I'm still convinced you made it up, but there you go. That's what the skeptic means.
Well, remember you have Malkovich and you have Davidovich.
I know, but Doctorovich, and you basically doctor people. You help people, and your name is Doctorovich. If that were in a screenplay, they'd say that the writer was contriving it. But there you go.
But
Maybe.
Remember this, that Doctorovich existed long before I was in the health field.
Okay, you've now ruined it. You've now spoiled the conceit. This is terrible. It's back to the real world. And on which note, thank you so much for your time. It's been an education, and hope to have you back some other time soon. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Right, bye-bye.
God bless. Bye.